your neighbors as we move forward with the next phase of this project. Next slide, please. We do want to acknowledge that today is Indigenous Peoples Day. And so on Indigenous Peoples Day, we really want to recognize this day and honor America's first inhabitants and the tribal nations that continue to thrive in our area today. It's been said that the Indigenous peoples are the original environmentalists. Tribal groups often will face disproportionate effects of a warming climate as well. So as the City Council has asked us to lead this project with an equity focus, we really want to take a moment to recognize and celebrate the many Indigenous communities and cultures here in our area and in California and across the country. Great news out of the White House today to actually get some recognition for this day. So today, here's the detailed agenda. We'll do a quick introduction. We will dive straight into some questions that you have. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time discussing measures. And so for those of us who were here at the first public workshop, we talked in general about goals and greenhouse gas emissions targets. Today, we're really focusing on what measures we are looking at taking in the city of Cupertino to hit those goals in the future. So this should be really enlightening discussion here around what exactly life might look like here in the city of Cupertino as we go into our next decade of climate action. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Mike here with Cascadia. He's going to run through a few logistic details and show you how to use our polling system with a little warm-up poll.
Great. Good evening, everyone, and thanks, Andre, for the introduction. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. I know we've are probably really familiar with Zoom and the functions of Zoom, but I just wanted to just go over and remind people about the various functions and how to use Zoom, especially in this webinar format. So first off, everyone should automatically be muted and have their video off. And so we recognize there's a lot of people attending tonight, so thank you for being understanding of that. We also encourage people to connect to the computer to get the full experience. We are having a PowerPoint presentation that we're sharing tonight, and then we'll also be having some interactive questions that you can participate either from your phone or from the computer, though definitely if you're participating on a computer, you can see the results update in live time. We also wanted to remind people that you can submit questions to the city to answer during the presentation or throughout tonight's workshop using the Q&A box. So if it's at the bottom of your screen, you should see an option that says Q&A. And so in there, you can type in any question you want to ask or that is coming to you. In addition, we also wanted to remind folks that if you see a question and it really resonates with you, or you have the same question, you can upvote questions by clicking the thumbs up under each of the questions in the Q&A box. This will definitely help us prioritize because we often get a lot of questions throughout workshops, and doing the thumbs up can help prioritize what are some of the high priority questions we need to answer tonight. In the Q&A box, there's also an option for city staff to respond to questions typed out. So this, again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box and we can facilitate that. If you're having any issues with the Q&A box or with, we're using a third-party platform called Poll Everywhere tonight. If you're having any issues with these other functions, you can always type and share feedback or questions in the chat. So the chat tonight is going to go to all the panelists we have. And so the panelists will see the questions and they'll respond to the whole group with the answer as well. So again, if you're having any issues submitting questions via the Q&A box, you can always share your feedback via the chat. And in this moment, we're going to begin troubleshooting and testing out our Poll Everywhere. And if you're having issues with using that, you can again use the chat. So with that, We have a few warm-up poll questions to both kind of hopefully get everyone thinking about climate change and climate action for ourselves. And so I'm going to walk over through two ways you could participate. One, if you're on a computer or a laptop, or you can go directly to pollev.com/Cascadia. And we're going to put that in the chat in a moment so people can just click to that if they want. And so you can share your responses in this chat. If you're on your phone, which I know a few of y'all are on your phone, you can text the word Cascadia, Cascadia, to the number 22333. So I'm going to say that again, just knowing that we have some people calling in on the phone. So if you are on your computer and you want to provide answers via your computer, you can go to the website pollev.com/Cascadia. Or if you're on your phone, you can text the word Cascadia, Cascadia, to the number 22333. And you shouldn't be charged for the text, so it's a free text too. So give everyone a moment, and let's just transition to the next slide and test some of these questions and warm up our brains for tonight. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Megan. So the first question we want to ask you is, what is one thing you want to see the city do or change in this climate action plan? What is one thing you want to see the city do or change in this climate action plan? Great. So here are some of the questions. Go zero waste, don't want to see natural gas appliances banned. How will Cupertino go net zero? Be the city more aggressive and ambitious? Be a leader for other California cities? Less use of water in public spaces and encouraging more sustainable food alternatives? Significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from power plants? We see some things coming in via the chat. So also eliminating fossil fuel city vehicles. Seeing the city ask the state and federal representatives to support action to reduce the footprint. Prioritize the environment more, incentivize upgrades to homes. More non-vehicle transportation, such as walking or biking, setting a goal to eliminate natural gas distribution. Wonderful. And for those, again, at the top of the screen, you can see the ways to join. So again, you can either go to pollev.com/Cascadia or text Cascadia to the number 22333. Great. All right, well, let's go to the next question. So the next question we have is, what is one thing you want to do or change to reduce your own carbon footprint? So the question is, what is one thing you want to do or change to reduce your own carbon footprint? Great. So using more public transportation, increase insulation in house, install solar panels, moving out of a standalone house into a small apartment, bike more, use less plastic, reduce automobile use, upgrade homes, windows, and insulation. Some things coming into the chat, you see replace gas furnace with a heat pump, install a heat pump water heater, replace hybrid with an electric car. Great. Great. So let's go to the next slide. And so this time, rather than putting it in poll everywhere, we want to encourage people to also get a sense of both this poll everywhere function, but also get used to using the chat function as well. So in the chat box, can you outline or answer this question? Why did you decide to attend the workshop today? So this is for folks if you don't want, if you're not able to use the computer for poll everywhere, or if you're unable to use your phone, you can always submit all of your answers tonight via the chat box. And so we just want to get people familiar with the chat box tonight. So supporting effective measures to decarbonize Cupertino. You want to learn more about the future and the plans we have. Environmental activist, hoping to see and learn more about Cupertino's plan. Wanting to see what the city is up to, wanting to be involved with climate action, making sure that the youth voice is here and present, taking action taking action locally is important, better understanding interaction between individual actions and government policy, learn about programs available to residents, would like to do something to fight climate change rather than feeling helpless. Great. Thank you for all of those answers. That's really helpful. And again, just wanting to reiterate, thank you all for being here tonight too. Great. So with that, I'm going to transition back over to Andre, who's going to give an overview of the Climate Action Plan.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, everyone. We're really here to listen and have a dialogue with you all. So please, I'd like to encourage you to continue to ask questions in the Q&A box or throw your comments into the comment box. We'll answer as many of them as we can during tonight's workshop. Anything that we're not able to answer, we will publish on our website at cupertino.org/climate-action. So your comments are really making a difference in the direction of this plan. Next slide, please. We'd just like to do a very brief overview of climate action and the history of climate action here in Cupertino before we dive into the main content. So what does climate change look like for us here in the Santa Clara Valley and in California? Really, it means an increased frequency and intensity of hazards. These are risks that we are looking at managing and also adapting to. So these are things you could call black swan events, where you might just ask the insurance industry that how we're dealing with these things. Things that may have been an extreme 100-year event are projected to become more frequent. So this really puts stress on our stability and our future here. And also introduces a lot of equity issues, as one of the commenters pointed out. Some people may take the brunt of these changes more than others, depending on where you live and the resources available to you. So it's our duty as a city in California to really do what we can to protect health, safety, and commerce here in the city of Cupertino. And that's here what we're talking about. Next slide. We really do have some good news, though. Good news is that solutions are already available. and are attracting immense investments in innovation, technological, and different ways of doing business. These solutions are already becoming more economically competitive, and they're really changing the systems that we rely on. So we really are in the middle of a very large set of systems changes here in Cupertino that is affecting everybody in the globe. The City Council has chosen to take some early actions in climate action starting in 2015, getting ahead of many other cities in the state of California and in the United States, and really giving direction towards what we call carbon neutrality. That's a executive order that was signed by Governor Brown in 2019. And so we're really just in the middle of this big transition that will have an impact on many of the systems that we rely on. And it's up to us to really stay on top of these changes. And our point is to really look at opportunities to improve quality of life with these actions as well. And as well as managing those risks, we're really also looking at things that can improve life and make life here more inclusive. Next slide, please. So what have we done since our first climate action plan? I mentioned it was adopted in 2014, 2015, one of the very first climate action plans in the state of California. We, since then, have operated a portfolio of projects that are really guided by the climate action plan. The CAP generally is a very big strategic roadmap to guide us and all of the staff in exploring different projects and portfolios of projects that we can do. Some examples of those projects have been that we have greatly expanded the number of protected bike lanes in the city. We've done innovative things like launching the VIA shuttle, which could be an important part of providing mobility in a low carbon way. We have required all new construction to be zero carbon with no new fossil fuels installed. That is our, excuse me, that is our electric reach code that was passed in the end of 2019. We've set up systems like the Cupertino Climate Challenge, which is a web application so that families, schools, and other groups can create their own personal climate action plan. You can log into that and have some fun, kind of gamify your own CAP. That's at cupertinoclimateaction.org. And we've set up a lot of data collection services, including our Building OS, which is a set of data portals that are publicly available. They can report out real-time energy and water use for our municipal operations. And I mentioned there's a lot of opportunity in climate action. In the last 2 years alone, the staff here has used our status as a climate leader to apply for or receive more than $2 million in grant funding directly tied to our sustainability plans. So that's why the CAP is very important. It really demonstrates that we are taking this issue seriously and that we have a strong community base of support to continue on this path. Next slide, please. So what have we learned and how have we done? We've really learned that a few high impact things can really move the needle. That's why in our next climate action plan, we're trying to focus on just a few very high impact measures. And measures are outcomes that we're looking for in these particular sectors. You can see the sectors here in this stacked bar graph that shows the various ways that we measure greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Cupertino. And you can see that the things that have really made a difference in our path here as we travel towards reducing emissions is really buying clean electricity and increasing the adoption of fuel efficient vehicles. So the true levers that the city has is really in our ability to promote and regulate land use, to coordinate actions among individual actors and businesses, as well as to allocate our investment dollars in a way that considers the pollution impact to society. Next slide, please. So here's our Here's our draft goals, looking out at where the City Council has directed us to study. We're really looking at updating our strategy and updating our targets here to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 50% from our 2010 baseline by the year 2030. And this puts us on a path towards achieving a carbon neutral city, which is known as emitting fewer emissions than we are absorbing naturally in the entire community by the year 2040 or earlier. So this is really important when we start talking about these measures, and your feedback will be really important on taking a look at imagining what your life could be like with some of these measures in place, and really having a much lower impact on pollution with the things that we can control. We're also looking at, I'll mention it, being a zero waste city by the year 2035, which means that we are really taking action to have a better sorted and cleaner waste stream. Probably the way we purchase things will have to change as well, and really making sure that we have maximum diversion of our waste from the landfills into recycling streams, or even into new ways that we can utilize recyclable materials here locally. We realize that the targets and the forecasts and the greenhouse gas inventories are very important, but they're imperfect tools. There's, of course, lots of uncertainties in how we measure and forecast emissions. And what we do is we try to align with the various protocols out there that allow cities and the state to coordinate our actions and show progress towards carbon neutrality. So the City Council has really asked us to take a look at what's it going to look like to be more aggressive than what the state of California is going to do, and to really demonstrate leadership in this space. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll wrap up the background and overview. Again, we have a lot of great materials from our first few public workshops on the website that you can see the recording with a little more detail on these actions and the background, and as well as view some of our progress reports from past years as we've stepped through since 2015 to today. So we're really trying to get in a mindset today as we move into the second part of the presentation and the interactive portion here of, again, asking yourself, what do you think about these measures? Consider some of these questions for yourself. What do you think of this life for yourself? Do you see barriers to achieving this kind of thing? Can you imagine how these kind of outcomes could happen in a way that's fair and achievable to yourself and your neighbors and the businesses that you frequent? Can you think about how someone who may have a lower income or may be disabled could do these things? And so those are some of the questions that we're really asking the community to give us feedback on as we go forward in looking at these measures and the specific actions that we'll have to take to make those measures reality. So these are just a few of the things here on the slide. And I have a couple numbers here that I can put behind this. So imagine a Cupertino where about half of homes are fully electric, have no fossil fuels powering their water heater or heating system. And most of those homes, a majority, are fully electric by the year 2040. Can we imagine a Cupertino where maybe about 15% of all your trips, say 2 to 4 of your trips around town are fully by active transport, that is by either bikes or scooters or skateboards, rather than in a single occupancy vehicle. And could you imagine driving an electric or a hybrid vehicle? Some of the numbers that we're looking at would be we need to increase the number of electric vehicles in the city from about 5 to 6% today, all the way up to about 35% by the year 2030. So that's a big increase. How are we going to get there? These are the kind of questions we're asking you to give us your input on today. And I think that is the majority of the presentation I wanted to do. I think we have time to take a few questions. And I believe that one of our staff members is going to facilitate just 1 or 2 questions over the next couple minutes.
Hi, I'm Gilly Corral, Climate Utilities Analyst, and we do have a couple of questions coming through on various subjects. There were a couple around the natural gas usage and increase in emissions. If we have any insight as to what caused that over the years. I know that there are some privacy data reasons why we can't go into too much detail, but if you have any thoughts on that, you can start there.
Yeah, I'll say stay tuned. We have some updates coming on our greenhouse gas emissions. You can see lots of detail on that at our most recent greenhouse gas inventory, which is available on the website.
Great, let's see. We also, they're still coming in. We have one on, just switching gears a little bit. If we do prioritize bike lanes and active transportation, if there are thoughts on where the funding could come from in order to support that.
That's a good question. So one of the proposed actions that we're looking at would be to take a look at different ways to fund additional infrastructure like bike lanes. And of course, a lot of those today are done as part of the bike pedestrian plan, which is a really comprehensive plan that we take chunks of that plan every year and fund those improvements to the general plan. You can imagine that we would probably be looking for alternative funding sources if we wanted to really accelerate that work to complete that master plan much quicker. So, you know, cities around the state are looking at alternate ways to create funds for that, including actually looking at fees for using the roads at certain times, as you might see in Europe or some parts of Asia, as well as looking at a different way to fund road improvements. As you may know, we have the gas tax federally, which really funds a lot of road improvements around the country. And so we're looking at ways across the board to generate more funds with those kind of actions. Anything like that would probably, just to give you an example of how the CAP would look at something like that, we would propose that as a particular action. And those kind of things would probably take a little bit more of a study or coordination regionally or with the state to make them happen. And so it's important to get those kind of things in the CAP to give ourselves, the staff here, really clear direction to either perform that study and when we should do that in terms of priorities and all the other things that the city does.
I know it's a little past 6, not sure if we have time for one more question.
Maybe one more quick question I want to dive
Okay.
Yeah, we have until 6:05.
Oh, we do, great, okay, never mind. We have time for a few more questions. There are some coming in around electricity demand, just kind of combining a couple here on how PG&E or the city plans to meet the demand of all electric appliances in the future. If there are any ideas around perhaps generating electricity in the city or Santa Clara on that level, if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah, an all-electric future is something that has been proposed statewide for meeting these carbon emission standards. It's just a lot easier to decarbonize at the big utility scale than it is to every individual building. But I think the consensus is that we'll need both. And so we haven't heard anything from PG&E that that's an immediate concern for having enough electricity. Of course, there's issues of electric grid reliability. That's a whole nother issue when it comes to providing a more resilient grid infrastructure. Those are issues that the whole state is grappling with currently. I think one of the best solutions that the grid modelers are looking at right now is really a combination of installing big utility scale solar and wind, geothermal, and perhaps offshore wind projects. Combine that with big battery storage systems and other ways to actually store energy at the utility scale. And then also doing more neighborhood things like distributed energy resources down at the home level. So the future that we're imagining really is going to combine all of those different levels down from your individual home all the way up to the scale of the utility grid, and interoperate all of those things in a smart way that could then be more resilient. So I think a short answer is it's going to take all of the above. And there's a lot of great research being done right here in the Bay Area at places like Stanford, if you want to learn more.
Great, thanks. We do have a couple questions around just to cover a couple of the different sectors here, switching to waste. There was a question around what is a common type of item in the landfill. I just wanted to mention that food waste is about 40% of our waste stream, just to mention that. And another waste related question was what we can do to reduce or prevent the use of single-use plastic produce bags or other plastics using Cupertino.
Sure, I'll say that there's another effort going on right now with our colleagues in the city about single-use plastics. And so that's another site that you can actually go on right now. There's a survey going on about single-use plastics and what we should do from a regulation standpoint to try to reduce these types of plastic from food establishments, restaurants, and grocery stores. And so that's an active study happening right now. And what was the first part of the question, Billy?
I just kind of answered it live about the different waste items that go into landfill. Thanks, Andre. And I see also some questions, a few questions or comments coming in about biking and walking, the bike plan. There was one about a couple related to how we can encourage more biking and walking and active transportation. I know that's a big part of our CAP update that we're considering as well.
Yeah, transportation is a major source of emissions. So, it's really just transportation and buildings that we're looking at over the next 10 years to really make an impact. And, the bike ped plan has a lot of great project ideas for improving the safety and reliability of active transit and public transit. So I think we'll dive into those as we talk more detail about the measures. And I think that's it for our time for questions. So I'll hand it back over to Mike. And again, for everyone on the line, please, we'll continue to submit your Q&A through the chat and the Q&A box. And we will actually actively try to answer those through the chat system, whatever we can. And whatever we cannot, we will publish a list of Q&As on the website. So thanks, everyone. A lot of great questions.
Great. Thanks, Gilly. Thank you, Andre. Yeah, and we're about to go into a little bit more interactive portion of tonight's evening. But again, reminder, if you have questions that come up, please continue to ask them in the Q&A chat box or type them in the chat box as well. And we will have people answering them. And then if we're unable to get to them, kind of what Andre said, we'll add them onto the website. So we have a running list of documentation of the questions and the answers to them as well. So with that, we're going to transition to this next phase, which is really kind of beginning to think about a lot of the different measures that we know we need to be taking. And this is really, we want to get input on a broad range of things about what are some of the challenges and barriers that you think you'll face, or your neighbors will face, or your family. What do we need to think in terms of the support needed to make this change for yourself or for your family? And finally, again, as Andre said earlier in the introduction, we really want to make sure that we are centering equity throughout this whole time. So really thinking about the equity considerations, especially people who have been historically underserved or overburdened. Thinking a lot about low-income folks, houseless folks, communities of color, limited English proficiency, and a broad variety of characteristics, and thinking about what it might mean for a variety of households and communities to also implement these actions. So with that, again, next slide, please. Wanting to provide a reminder that, again, there's two ways you can provide comments tonight. You can go to pollev.com/Cascadia. Or you can text Cascadia, CASCADIA, to the number 22333. If you did this earlier, it should just be the same either window if you have your computer, or if you texted, it should also, the texting line should still be live, so you can still use your phone as well. I'm going to give maybe 15 seconds again for people to reorient before we dive into the first set of measures. Great. If you have any issue, again, please, you can either let us know in the chat. And again, if you can't access Poll Everywhere, either through your computer or your phone, you can also put your answers in the chat as well, and we'll be logging those as well. So with that, I'm going to go over this first set of measures. And again, as we go over each of these measures, think about kind of the list of questions we had. So what are the challenges and barriers you see for yourself or your family or your neighbors? What do you need to see, or what's needed for you to make this change? And then what are the equity considerations? Who's going to benefit? Who's going to harm? Especially when we think about people from other different types of experiences or perspectives from ourselves. So with this, the first measure we're focused on is about making sure that half of Cupertino's buildings are completely electric. And so how we're going to do this is we're going to require all home and commercial appliances, HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and AC air conditioning systems to be all electric. Parts of how we can do this is renovate or replace when the old one fails, when there's a major building renovation, or at the point of sale when a building is sold. In addition, creating a requirement to remove gas lines in some types or a subset of residential or commercial buildings. So these could include below market rate housing, certain types of businesses, or buildings in neighborhoods with more exposure to poor air quality. Well, we can also create more electric buildings by streamlining the permitting process and waiving fees for electric heat pump retrofits as well. And so with this, I already see some of the answers in the chat. So we're going to go again, we're going to be using the Poll Everywhere function to this first question next. And so thinking about this measure of creating, making half of Cupertino's buildings all electric, what are the challenges or barriers do you see for yourself that will prevent you from making this change? What about your family or your neighbors? Great. So considerations of people needing to get people to install it, upfront costs, it might be hard to enforce. A cost, again, cheaper to replace with gas. having recommendations on what to change to. So gas is economical, so cost again, retrofitting older homes, streamlining permitting processes. Perceptions, so some of the things coming in from the chat, so perception that heat pumps are more expensive. Landlords, so needing to incentivize landlords. Being a renter. Great. Let's spend another 15 seconds. So let's go to the next question. So the next question we have, so thinking about the challenges and barriers, we don't want to pivot towards solutions. So what would be needed for you to make this change? And a lot of these things is we're thinking about what can the city do or what are the resources needed, especially when we think about the climate action plan's implementation and its success, and how can we make sure that it's effective and equitable. Great. So some of the things, city approved list of contractors and set pricing for the changes that need to be made. Planting more trees, which makes it cooler, which uses less energy. Providing education, providing a variety of resources, especially to direct landlords to financial payments to cover extra costs. Knowing what appliances are reliable and whose installation rates are fair. Monetary incentives, consultations, streamlined resources, information. Needing electricity to be cheaper. Some things coming in from the chat. So also data about a set of homes that made the change and lessons learned about their costs and benefits. City partnerships with companies. Wonderful. So let's transition to the last question we have. So again, we're going to go through these same 3 questions for each of the measures we're presenting. So the last thing we want to think about is, what are the equity considerations when we think about people from other perspectives, from other different types of experiences, especially those that have been overburdened and underserved? What are the considerations when needing to implement this measure effectively? Some things in, so renters, helping renters pay electric bills or make them lower, especially when solar is installed on a rental building. upfront costs and time costs for the renovations. Outreach and education can also educate people around benefits, especially for health. In the chat, there's some things about collective benefit when we stop global warming and make the air cleaner, improved indoor air quality. Low-income homeowners could potentially be harmed if there isn't support for them. Affordability of retrofits. Considerations about how renters might not be able to convince their landlords. That's a great consideration. Thank you to whoever wrote that. So making sure we address the huge burden it might have on low-income residents and renters. Providing grants or loans, installment plans. Electricity is more expensive and less reliable, especially during brownouts. Landlords may have to increase rents, so how can we offset that? Corporations taking on projects, great. All right. Well, we have 3 more measures to get to, so let's give another 10 seconds or so for answers to come in, and then let's transition to the next set of measures. So hopefully this will become quicker too, because we're going to be asking these same 3 questions. What challenges or barriers do you face, or your family or your neighbors? What do you need to see to make this change for yourself or your family? And what are the equity considerations? Who benefits, who's harmed? So let's go to the next set of measures. So we're going to present 2 slides here, both about as it relates to transportation. So this first one is having the goal of having most of our everyday trips, so trips to work, to the store, to different types of businesses, are done by public transport, walking, biking, scootering, or wheelchair. So some considerations and strategies to get us here is conducting a pilot program that designates streets specifically for bikes, adding bike lanes and increase bike parking, providing e-bike or e-scooter docking stations, and expanding the Via Cupertino shuttle program to neighboring cities. I'm going to give maybe 15 seconds for you to read before we transition to the next slide. So a lot of the strategies on this slide really focus on what are some of the incentives or enabling conditions that need to happen to make this transition away from cars. On the next slide, if you can move forward now, we want to begin thinking about what are some of the other potential sticks needed to promote the shift away from single occupancy passenger vehicles to a community that's more dependent on active transportation and public transportation. So some of these considerations is charging a fee for vehicles during peak congestion times in certain high traffic zones. So the goal of this is really trying to address this issue of traffic and congestion, which we also know has a lot of spillover impacts on air quality indexes for the communities and businesses that surround those areas as well. In addition, thinking about what are the new taxes or fees. I know earlier Andre mentioned a potential gas tax or considering car tap fees to fund new types of public transportation, transit options, bike lanes, and transit programs. We also want to allow developers to build without off-street parking. And then we also want to install parking meters throughout the city as well. So all of these are associated again with, if the previous slide to promote more active transportation and public transportation was about incentives and funding, this slide looks a little bit more at the disincentives. So with that, we're going to go into the same series of questions. So the first question, what challenges or barriers do you see for yourself that will prevent you from making this change? What about your family or for your neighbors? Great. In the chat, some reasons why people don't use bikes more, especially for shopping, is it can be hard to carry shopping bags on your bike back from the store. So can't control when you get off work. It's going to be during peak hours, and that's not equitable. Safety and access to bicycle and pedestrian corridors. Difficult to safely walk and bike in the business areas. For those who need to commute into Cupertino, negative equity implications with a congestion fee. None. It's great to hear. Let's give another 15 seconds and we'll transition to the next question. Great, let's transition to the next question. So in thinking about the challenges and barriers, what is needed for you to make this change? All right, I see there's a potential issue with poll everywhere. So let's pivot to the chat. So this is why, while we troubleshoot this. Great, so other things needed to see. So having more bikes that can carry stuff, higher frequency public transit services, whether via the Cupertino shuttle or other VTA partnerships. Shaded bus stops, need a better bike or pedestrian infrastructure, having longer operating hours for flexible public transit. education for kids and teens on rules of the road, higher frequency public transit, and safer roads for parking. Great. All right, well, now let's transition to the next question. Again, let us know if you're able to see these questions or not. So what are the equity considerations? Who would benefit and who would be harmed? Great, people can see the question. Oh, no, some people can't. Great. So if you're in the chat, charging for parking would affect low income folks. You need to think about the solution, how it's designed. Great, people who need to drive at certain hours can't miss peak congestion times. Thinking about older populations or those that are disabled. Impacts to lower income folks. Those without cars might be affected by public transit route closures or reductions. So focusing on the benefits of an improved bike and pedestrian infrastructure, that also includes health benefits. Great. Safety and considering both safety while biking, but safety of locking up bikes. Great. Those who believe in efforts would benefit, those who don't will be inconvenienced. Great, let's give another 15 seconds. You can type in the question or text your answer. And if that isn't working for you, you can also put it in the chat. Great, thinking about the benefits for all. Awesome. All right, well, let's go over to the next measure. So thank you all for providing that. And sorry for the hiccup in the poll everywhere. It seems like we got it fixed. So thank you all for being patient and quickly pivoting to the chat. So the next measure and the goal that we're thinking of wanting your feedback on. So the last measure was really focusing on disincentivizing cars, single occupancy vehicles, and incentivizing more things like walking, public transportation, biking, and transportation options like that. However, this one focuses on when we do need to drive, we drive with an electric vehicle. So some of the considerations for this is adding more electric vehicle charging stations. You can see here's a charging station at the library in the picture here. We can also require shopping centers or other business centers to install EV chargers for 20% of their parking spaces. We can also pursue an electric vehicle car share program. That would be important, especially if people can't afford their own EVs, but still need to drive for other reasons. And finally, making sure we conduct outreach so we connect people and residents with programs that make electric vehicles more affordable. There are a variety of rebates and subsidies and low interest loans that already make them more affordable, offered through various federal and state programs. And the city can also connect residents with other types of programs, such as through the Silicon Valley Clean Energy organization as well. So I'm going to pause here again for about another 15 seconds if you're reading the slide. But again, we're going to think about challenges or barriers for yourself, what's needed for you to make this change, and again, what are the equity considerations as part of this? So let's go to the next slide, please. So what are in thinking about when you do drive, we should be driving electric vehicles. What are the challenges or barriers you see for yourself that's going to prevent you from making this change for your family and for your neighbors? Great. So for people thinking about road trips and whether EVs can last or have the durability to do the mileage on road trips, can't afford it, so need a car that will travel 600 miles on one charge. Cost is the largest barrier. Outreach is not sufficient. Federal and state programs need to be improved, or else we'll never drive down costs. Current vehicle works, so there's no pressing need to switch cars now. Charging anxiety. Don't seeing a need to upgrade or replace for many years. For a hybrid, we don't need to see more chargers in shopping centers taking up parking spaces. People can charge at home. Cost benefits. Not enough charging stations. Are people kind of hog whatever is available for long periods of time? Current EVs don't have the range. The switching is expensive. Great. Also, considerations about batteries, which go to a landfill, aren't more negative for the environment. Providing more EV charging for apartment dwellers. Right, driving long distances and feeling like they're going to get stuck. Wonderful. Well, thank you for those. Let's go to the next slide. So again, what would be needed for you to make this change? So again, thinking about the challenges and barriers we just went over, what do we need to see from the city, from this climate action plan for us to make this change? It's nothing, it's already there. In the chat, we see plug-in hybrids with 100 miles range on battery. So kind of more efficient batteries, longer range vehicles, more infrastructure for quick charging, especially batteries that can be recycled, lower cost EVs, requiring gas stations to have EV chargers, having EV chargers at your residence, longer range vehicles, having cost-effective EVs, more EVs in multi-tenant complexes, cheaper and more reliable electricity, having a convenient car sharing program alongside other improvements to infrastructure and transit, having more charging stations that work for all EVs, not for just one brand. So having trade-in incentives. Great. Let's go to the next question. So again, thinking about this, what are the equity considerations? I think we've already covered a lot of those, especially as it relates to cost and affordability. But what other things can we think about in terms of the equity considerations of switching to electric vehicles? Who's going to benefit and who's going to be harmed? Great. Switching to EVs will improve air quality, which benefits all. Great. So it's easy for people in single family homes to install chargers, but not for apartment dwellers. Lower income folks benefiting from subsidized charging. In the chat, there's also thinking about alternatives to EVs, such as high-speed trains, similar to the ones they have in Europe. Great. Informing folks about the help and incentives for EV vehicles. Great. They're expensive. They don't last as long and batteries need to be replacing. Burden on families, especially those who need a larger vehicles. Great. Harmed by continuing to invest in car-centric infrastructure, even though there are cleaner cars. This still doesn't help safety concerns from accidents, just alternatives to owning a car. In the chat, also considering about alternative fuels, such as hydrogen, methanol, and ethanol. Support for car sharing, especially benefiting people who can't afford to take on the full costs of car ownership. Great. Thank you for these. These are all really helpful. Thanks everyone for being so thoughtful with their answers. Let's go on to the last measure we have tonight. So we're making a pivot, and again, kind of what was asked earlier was about waste and landfills. And so knowing that, especially when things like food waste is going to landfills, there's a lot of greenhouse gases such as methane that's associated with landfills, especially as food and other organic materials decompose. So in this measure, the goal is to just create less waste in the landfill, just preventing waste from getting there in the first place. So some of the considerations and strategies for this include sending waste to a special recovery facility to better sort waste. Um, so for example, we can send garbage to the Smart Station in Sunnyvale, which allows for a second chance for recyclable items to be sorted out from garbage that's going to be sent to the landfill, increasing the diversion rate. This can help reduce landfill waste by up to 30%, but it could increase trash bills as well. To also prevent waste, we can host repair clinics, also known as fix-it clinics, which are free events where people can go with broken electronic equipment or appliances or other items or tools, and work with other knowledgeable folks or volunteers to repair their electronics and appliances. So repairing rather than throwing away and buying a new one. So thinking more about a circular economy rather than a consumptive one. Thinking about developing a program to encourage reusable diaper collection services. Unsure if folks are familiar, but diapers aren't recyclable and they can be a huge part of a waste stream. And so thinking about programs about how we can minimize diaper related waste as well. And finally, requiring large events to have a waste management company that oversees the event's disposal and waste efforts, ensuring that event attendees know how to sort things into the correct bins, as well as making sure and handling the waste and making sure that the most amount of waste is diverted from the landfill as possible. Great. So for example, giving specific repairable electronics, I think one of the things we commonly see is having phone repair clinics, for instance. So when you have a broken phone, you can just go and get it fixed by changing out parts or troubleshooting it rather than getting a new phone. You can also do it with other types of appliances in the home, such as microwaves or toaster ovens, or other types of electronics, such as computers or things that might be helpful. So let's go to the first question here. So what challenges or barriers do you see for yourself that will prevent you from making this change, or for your family or for your neighbors? So no personal incentive switching to reusable products, no incentives for anyone to produce less waste, knowing what can be recycled, widespread use of plastic in consumer goods, it's hard to avoid. This seems pretty doable, especially with the current waste collection system, like that these are all encouragement ideas. Someone might not be able to wait for a repair clinic to fix a phone. Good communication from the city and providing guidance on waste disposal. Some things in the chat, so overpackaged groceries. It's challenging to purchase favorite snacks in bulk. Everything is in single servings. You can't bring your own drink containers to purchase drinks, especially with COVID. Thinking about upcycling items, taking them out of the waste stream. All right, well, let's go to the next question here. So again, thinking about the challenges and barriers, what do you need to see from the city or from this climate action plan for you to create less waste that will go to the landfill? Great, some things in the chat. So it's difficult to find anyone capable or interested in repairing stuff. So maybe something along the lines of the city identifying or providing those experts or professionals to help lead some of these repair workshops. City action preventing single-use plastics at city restaurants and shops. Packaging, so everything comes in plastic containers or bags. So needing to insist that products are repairable. That came in from the chat. Starting with more education about proper sorting, requiring restaurants to use paper or aluminum clamshells only. Compostable clamshells are not compostable. So more education, what can be cycled, how the items are recycled, and starting early with children so they can teach their parents. Charging households based on the amount of waste they create. Other mandate diaper collection services like Earth Baby and provide incentives. Education via composting classes or discounts on composters. Well, let's go to our last question here. So in thinking about the equity considerations, who would benefit and who would harm? Especially when we think about the variety of strategies to create less waste or reduce waste that goes into the landfill. So people who share waste bins could be harmed if things sorted incorrectly. So probably thinking about multifamily complexes or apartment buildings. People who can't afford higher trash bills would be harmed if prices increased. We need to make disposing, this came in from the chats, not make disposing of stuff too hard, or people just throw it regardless. Great. and for everyone benefits from creating less waste, good to learn to purchase what you need. So considerations for small restaurant owners, food trucks, or other small businesses that might currently rely on plastic takeout containers. All right, well, we have a little under 10 minutes left, so we're going to transition now, and we're going to show you, go back to, again, thinking about this vision of 2030. What does the year 2030 look like? And so Andre went over this earlier in terms of thinking about, now that we've learned about the measures tonight. So what does 2030 look like for Cupertino? The fact that there's no more gas furnaces or gas water heaters, and our homes are heated and cooled with new electric appliances. Half of all your trips in the town are by bike, scooter, wheelchair, walking, or public transit. Having electric vehicles, and making sure half the amount of our waste is sent to the landfill and we can divert the other half. So in thinking about, again, your life in 2030, so about 10 years from now, if we want to go to the next slide, we want to pose a few questions as you think about this life for yourself or for your family. And the first thing we want to just think, when you think about everything holistically and comprehensively, we can go to the next slide, please. What are the barriers you see? And not just thinking about each individual measure we introduce, but the barriers when we think of it as a whole in this collective transition. And we're running a little short on time, so let's spend about a minute here, and then we have one more question after this. Great, so technology isn't affordable enough. Great, we should aim to produce less waste, not just divert it. Not really, someone said in the chat, not really barriers, but it's a different lifestyle, but better. Great, let's give another 30 seconds or so. So no problem, except the first measure going to cost a fortune to operate all electric with a 2,000 square foot home. Guidance and accessibility to resources, challenges. Costs, perceived inconvenience, and the lifestyle shift. We're creatures of habit, changes can be hard. Highly unlikely most of this will happen, so because for renters, we keep our cars for a long time too, so don't know when we'll buy a new car. Great. So let's go to, skip to the next question, and let's go to this last question about what else is missing. Can you go to the next question, please? Yeah. So we talked a lot about a lot of different measures and considerations, but what else are we missing? And what other ideas do you have? So maximizing water resources. Great. Thinking of lobbying, pressuring state and federal government representatives to make the change. thinking of alternative fuel sources or banning them, thinking about the excess carbon. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide, but this question is still going to be open in the background. So now we're going to do conclusions and next steps. So first of all, I just again want to say thank you for everyone for coming tonight. There's a lot of great feedback and input on tonight's questions and the measures we presented. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So one of the things we also want to do is we just want to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable, making sure we're engaging a broad swath of the Cupertino community. So we have a series of 3 questions about various demographic questions about your race or ethnicity, gender identity, and your age. These demographic questions are optional, but it's just, again, helpful for us to kind of get a sense of who we're talking to and making sure that we're talking to people representative of the entire community. So while you fill out those demographic questions, I'm going to turn it over to Andre, who's going to go over other ways about you can get involved as well.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thanks everyone for the really active conversation. If you go to the next slide, please, there's a few ways we want to share with you to stay involved. This is an ongoing process and we're right in the thick of it right now. So a few things you can do, and that we'd also ask you to share some of these options around with your networks, at your school, at your workplace, and generally try to get the word out. We really appreciate that. The more voices in this process, the better this plan will be at the end of the day, especially if you're seeing kind of contradicting comments or different viewpoints being expressed. This is extremely important for us to cast a really wide net for in the Cupertino community to get everybody's opinions out there and documented for the City Council to consider at the end of the day. So a few ways you can stay involved is to complete our survey. Our survey covers many of the same actions and measures that Mike has gone over with even a little more detail. And it does have the ability to type in and share any unique ideas that you may have. If you've put them in the chat box here today during today's public workshop, then please know that everything's being documented and will roll up into the final planning draft plan that's going to be produced in the next couple months here. There's also the ability to write your ideas on a free form sticky note on our website. Once our draft plan is actually drafted in a documentation format, we will upload that to the website as well. So you can see some of the more detailed recommendations and again, provide your feedback on that for the City Council and our Sustainability Commission. Speaking of the commission, so the Sustainability Commission is sponsoring this process and is an extremely valuable voice at the City Council. And their next meeting is coming up later this month on Thursday, October 21st at 4 p.m. You can see all the details there on the city calendar, and their agendas get posted at City Hall. So that's the next opportunity that you'll have to get this progress report. And at that meeting, the Sustainability Commission is going to be deliberating some of the same measures and actions that you've heard about today. And we do have also planned a study session at the City Council, at Cupertino City Council. I'll mention that both the Commission and the Council meetings are still being held virtually. So very similar Zoom format to what we've all been getting used to over the last year and a half. The City Council study session is going to be November 16th. No registration required for either of those events. With that, I think that concludes our public meeting today. We really appreciate your time and your efforts today to get your comments out here and documented. Once again, my name is Andre. I'm the Sustainability Division Manager here at the City of Cupertino. I want to thank Mike with Cascadia Consulting, who's helped us facilitate this conversation, and all the City of Cupertino staff who has been working behind the scenes to answer all your questions. So once again, thanks again for spending your evening with us. Keep an eye out to our website to see all this recording as it's posted, and all of the other cool stuff that we've posted on there for your information. Thanks again for helping us to share the opportunities to stay involved, and I wish you an excellent evening.
Thank you all.